All right, welcome back to another episode of The Whole Lawyer. And we have a good episode for you today. We are discussing the war in Iran. But before we get to that, please like, share, and subscribe to the podcast, The Whole Lawyer. We are on YouTube, we are on Instagram, we're on TikTok. Just type in The Whole Lawyer and we will come up. And that's going to allow us to bring you more amazing content like the one we have today. So, like I said, we're discussing Iran, and of course, on The Whole Lawyer, we have to bring in the expert, the aficionado, the international relations connoisseur, and this is another segment, an installation of the Atom Bomb. Please welcome back to The Whole Lawyer podcast, Adam Sadick, Esquire, international relations guru. Please welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate you, Akeem. Thank you for that welcome.
This is like number 3.
I think so. Yeah, this would be number 3, I believe.
Man, you about to have your own playlist, man. We got to curate your own playlist, man.
Let's do it. But no, this was a very timely, very relevant topic. Thought this would be, because of the stakes, for everybody involved. This is something I definitely want to talk about. And to the viewers, definitely I'm very avid follower in international relations. But please, I would encourage y'all to do your own research, read your own primary materials, come to your own opinion. I'm a man. I'm just a dude. I happen to be an attorney, but I'm not all seeing, all knowing. Please do your own research, inform yourselves, and that's the best advice I can give for sure.
I love it. And as a good foundation to your research that you guys are about to do, we're about to dive into this Iranian conflict that went down last week. Where do you want to start? Where do you think is the best place to start?
So I thought about that, and I'll just say to you and viewers, this is a very complicated subject, very complex. We're talking about, if we really want to understand what's happening right now, you have to go back and digest about 100 years of Iranian, possibly more, history and American foreign policy and international relations. So, a lot of what I'm gonna, just a fair warning, because this topic is so broad, a lot of what I'm going to say is both, the quick and dirty version, very general. It pains me to kind of give that, but in order for us to have a productive conversation, I kind of have to skim some topics. Again, as I said earlier, do your own research. Don't take my synopsis as fact and law. But in order to have a discussion, that kind of has to happen. But I think what I wanted to start is just make a few remarks about the conflict, and then get into history. There's a couple of points in Iranian history and the history of American-Iranian relations that I think we have to discuss, even if just at surface level, to really understand what's going on here. So first, this conflict. I'm very glad that you used that war because I'm very glad that you used that term, because I was about to, actually, if you were to describe it as a war. As a matter of fact, yes, we are at war with Iran. We are attacking them. We've done, thousands of strikes. They're all an act of aggression against Iran. But technically, under the law, this is not a war. War is declared by Congress. And more importantly than that, war is authorized by the United Nations Security Council. Okay, and the UN Charter, which lays all this out, is the highest body of law in the land under the U.S. Constitution. It's an international treaty, right? So we are tied to what is laid out in the UN Charter, and a lot of the UN Charter is dedicated to the rules on war. It is illegal to attack another country or to attack the assets of another country or to even threaten to attack another country without let me start this. It's only legal in 2 scenarios. One, if the United Nations Security Council votes and authorizes that military action, then within the parameters of their order, military action is legal. The other is self-defense against an imminent or ongoing threat. If you are acting in self-defense, then it's legitimate to attack the person, to attack your aggressor, and to defend yourself. That's fine. None of those apply into the American-Israeli attack on Iran. This is a clear act of aggression, which is a war crime. In fact, if we're going back in history to the Nuremberg trials that happened after World War II, when we tried the Nazi generals and politicians and everyone involved, for even some journalists, in fact, for war crimes, it was established that aggression military attack, not under the framework we just mentioned, that's the worst crime you can do, essentially. And if you do attack a nation, if you wage an act of aggression, you are also responsible for any subsequent tragedies that happen. If we attack a country, a civil war breaks out, well, then we're also liable for the harm inflicted by that civil war. If a famine breaks out, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one thing that I do think it's immediately at the outset, before we even get into what's happening on the ground, it's very important for viewers to understand that this is an illegal war. If we were to have by some miracle, there were to be a Nuremberg-style tribunal where Trump and Vance and Netanyahu and all these people were tried, they would be hanged to death because this is a grave crime. It's totally illegal. That's before not even getting into of how they're actually waging the war. They're striking. They've now struck, I believe, 6 different schools. They're essentially and they've attacked hospitals. All sorts of civilian, and now they've escalated to the point where they're even attacking oil refineries. So they're attacking illegitimate targets. These are civilian targets. Before we even look at how they're actually prosecuting the war, it is, from the very get-go, it is illegal. There's no legal or moral justification for the war that's happening right now, and it is in fact. Sorry, go ahead.
No. So who defines that? Because this administration is saying that they had intelligence on weapons of mass destruction, that there was corruption in the government, that this is not just an unwarranted attack. This was under your rubric, it's preeminent. Like, we had intelligence about Iran possibly attacking America. That's why we struck first. So they're not classifying it as, oh, we just jumped out the window and want to attack these people. They're saying we had a legal justification for this, and it seems like they're changing their story. One point is weapons of mass destruction, then it's corruption, then we didn't have the so I mean, they're not helping their case with defining the reasons, but they have been spitting out these buzzwords to say that this wasn't unwarranted. So who defines that? Who decides?
That's a great question. So, I mean, who decides? I mean, ultimately, war, the ability to declare war, at least under federal law, lies with Congress. Congress is the one who ultimately authorizes the president to take military action. And as I mentioned before, under international law, war can only legitimately be prosecuted through the UN Security Council. If the UN Security Council authorizes it, it's fine. Or if you're acting in self-defense, it's fine. But to your point about the justifications that the Trump administration has used, it's nothing new. Every act of aggression in history has had some pretext in one form or another. And actually, you drew some interesting parallels there. At least you raised them. This really does bring back memories of the Iraq War when they. And especially when you talk about the changing rationale, it started off as, we have intelligence that Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction, and then it changed. Oh, actually, okay, maybe he doesn't have weapons of mass destruction, but he supported Al Qaeda when they were planning 9/11. And then when that was proved false, it was like, oh, actually, yeah, so maybe he didn't support Al Qaeda, but actually, we're trying to nation build, and we're trying to, and we just don't like countries that aren't democracies. Okay, well, then that fell apart too, because just a 5-second review of American history shows that our biggest allies are actually some of the most anti-democratic, horrible dictatorships in world history. So that can't be. And so what you're seeing right now is a lot of that. And there's a couple points I want to make too, specifically about preemptive strike. Preemptive strikes are illegal under international law. Just because the Trump administration or Congress or whoever says, oh, they're about to attack us, or we have intelligence saying this, that, or the other, unless Iran is imminently attacking, unless they are putting missiles launching and those missiles are flying, it's illegal. You cannot say, there's no legal justification whatsoever to say, oh, they're going to attack us soon, so we're going to take them out first. That is an act of aggression. And a way to conceptualize this is, we're attorneys, and we took criminal law and torts. There are very similar parallels in the defense of self-defense, or even defense of others, between your right as a private individual and the rights of the state, right? So preemptive, there is no such thing as preemptive attack if you're trying to argue self-defense to a murder charge. That doesn't happen. You have to have clean hands.
Right.
You couldn't have created the danger. You also, if you are using force, the force has to be limited. It has to be narrowly tailored.
Yep. Yep.
Exactly. So by none of those standards is what none of those exceptions apply to what the United States is doing. And if we're being serious, like Iran doesn't have the capacity to attack the United States. They don't have intercontinental ballistic missiles. They can't strike Europe. They can't strike the United States. What they can do is strike American assets. And I think what essentially what Marco Rubio and Trump have admitted is like, oh, listen, like we thought. Basically, what's interesting is they said some variation of this multiple times, like, oh, we believe that Israel might attack them in response to an Israeli attack. Then they would target our military bases and radar and detection systems posted throughout the region in Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, etc. And in response to that, we would be attacking them. And again, that's not a legitimate reason for war.
It's like if was a fifth, we would all be drunk. It's like a whole lot of it's a whole lot of ifs. Like if yeah, sure
for sure. And one thing too, and again, there's a lot of details to cover here, but specifically on the nuclear issue, Iran does not present a nuclear threat to anyone, not even the other countries of the region. They're not, first of all, they're not close to enriching uranium to the extent that they would need to weaponize it and create a nuclear warhead. And but it's funny, if you go online, you see, Israeli and American actors saying this at various points, and going as far back as the 1990s. Oh, Iran is 3 months away from a nuclear bomb. Oh, Iran is weeks away from a nuclear bomb. They've been saying this for decades. It's simply not true.
Can you use it? I know you like soccer. Can you use a soccer example of like how big of a gap there is between Iran and the U.S. and Israel? Like, how much of a non-threat are there compared to like Messi or what? Like, use a soccer example.
So
if you can.
That analogy would be like, okay, let's say the United States and Israel would treat them as the same. And we go back to that point.
Right.
They would be like Paris Saint-Germain. Okay, so they won the Champions League last year. They crushed Inter Milan. They have one of the best, most expensive rosters, biggest names in international football. That would be like them going up against Orlando FC or whatever the name, like some rinky-dink team from like wherever. I mean, it's not even close. I mean, Iran, first of all, they're not a nuclear power. They don't have nukes, right? So right out of the gate, the United States and Israel have nukes. If they wanted to, they could incinerate the entire country in a matter of minutes. So right there's total imbalance in the disposition of forces. Iran's air force is decades out of date. Israel and the United States, they have F-35s. They have the most advanced drones and aircraft, the cutting edge of technology. I mean, it's just infinite gap in the ability to use and project force, military force. And it's the same in terms of their naval and their ground forces. I mean, the U.S. and Israel are just light years ahead. And I mean, and not just in terms of the quality, but the quantity. I mean, the United States has 800 plus military bases all around the world. We have half the world's nuclear warheads, give or take. The United States spends more on the military than the next 8 countries combined. And Israel is essentially an extension of that. They have much of the same military capabilities that we do. They're just as powerful in the realm of gathering intelligence and threat detection and things like that. Air defenses. I mean, just totally lopsided. That said, I mean, this is sort of a minor point, but that said, Iran is capable of defending itself, and it has, as we've seen. I mean, the United States and Israel, with this limited, air and naval and missile war, has decimated their defenses. But they've after all of that, they are still striking targets in the Gulf countries. They're striking targets in Israel. They're striking American personnel here and there. So, I mean, despite all of this, they can still project power. And this is just in the realm of, limited air, naval, missile war. If we get into a ground invasion, that's a totally different story. I mean, that would be there's rumors now that the United States is actually in the process of deploying, up to 100,000 ground troops in Iran, and that would be an utter disaster. You don't need to be a military expert to understand this, but I mean, just if you're curious, just take a look at the map of Iran and the topography. It's literally it's one giant mountain fortress. All of the most critical areas, their oil production facilities, there's industrial and urban centers. They're all located in mountainous, easily defensible, high altitude terrain. And even if you get, and that's on all of their borders, the western borders, they have the Zagros Mountains. On the north, they have the Caspian Sea, the Caspian Sea, and another mountain range. On the east, and the borders with Afghanistan, Pakistan, there's more mountains. And then the interior, assuming you make it through there alive, the interior of the country is just some of the harshest desert climates you can think of. That's just hostile. I mean, some places they get up to like 70 degrees Celsius. You can't just deploy a modern army to this country and take it over by force. I mean, if the United States were to do this, with regardless of if they have help on the ground, there's talks of Azerbaijan possibly invading, and there's been rumors that the CIA has been, recruiting forces among the Kurdish minority in Iraq and Iran to help in the event of a ground invasion. Even if all of that were to happen, I mean, we're talking about a Vietnam scale of casualties in the tens of thousands. And
when you said that it would be a disaster, I thought that you meant for Iran. You said for the U.S. and its troops, it'll be a disaster. If it's boots on the ground, the U.S. might be clipped.
So actually, you sorry, I mean to cut you off, but you actually raise an important point, and it's actually a good moral point too. I mean, here in the West, we tend to be sheltered from the wars that we create and prosecute around the world, and we don't, unless we're talking about the price of oil, the price of goods, inflation. We don't really focus on those are the effects on us, but we also just kind of write off the effects on Iran. I mean, obviously, the effects on Iran would be devastating, and the effects that just in the last week of what we've seen have also been devastating. I mean, we've now murdered illegally, extrajudicially, their head of state and a lot of the top brass of their civilian and military leadership in the strikes that happened last Saturday. And in fact, the war that took place last year, Iran and to a lesser degree, the United States did the same thing, just murdering the leaders of another country, which is crazy to think about. But now, I mean, we're essentially carpet bombing Tehran and other areas. I mean, you can see the videos are all over social media. Like I said, mentioned earlier in the episode, we've now bombed, I think it's about 6 different schools. That one strike in the one city, I forget the name. I think it was Minab. I may be saying that incorrectly, but you may have heard that we struck a girls' school, and I think it was like about 160 schoolgirls were murdered, hundreds more wounded. That's a grave war crime.
Yeah.
So they're already paying a price, and they've been paying a price. And another important point to mention is that even before you get to the physical violence, Iranians had been paying a price for decades. They've been under illegal sanctions by the United. Again, we use the word sanctions very loosely here in the West. Sanctions are an act of war. If you freeze the accounts of a state entity or an individual or a corporation, whatever, unilaterally, not through the United Nations Security Council, that is an act of war. And we have been, and our leaders and European leaders, they openly admit this, Israel as well. I mean, the purpose of sanctions, first of all, sanctions don't work. What happens with sanctions and all types of economic warfare is essentially it just makes life miserable for the civilian population. It increases the cost of food, increases the cost of fuels. It drives inflation up. You're essentially locking Iranians out of the international financial system, which alone has devastating effects. And what the expectation is that the situation, and you see this in Venezuela and Cuba as well. We've been doing the same thing there for decades. So the expectation.
I want to touch on, if we could break down sanctions real quick. So is Iran a part of the UN? Are they an official ally?
They've ratified the UN Charter. They are a United Nations member state, and they have the full list of rights and responsibilities that every other UN member has.
So sanctions can only be authorized through the UN. I mean, obviously the U.S. has a bunch of power. How is the U.S. able to just say, forget y'all UN, we're going to sanction? And how do you even have the resources or the power to sanction this nation state and cut off their supply like that?
So that's a very good question. So again, legally, yes, it is only the United Nations Security Council can sanction individuals or entities. Unlawfully, however, if you are a country like the United States that is the world's only superpower and is the richest, most powerful, and most secure country in the history of organized human life, then you can act unilaterally, whether it's legal or moral or not. You can do that. I mean, the U.S., first of all, the dollar is essentially the world's reserve currency. and U.S. Treasury bonds, which, and we could have a whole nother discussion on this, a set of discussions, in fact, because this is a very complex topic. But U.S. Treasury bonds are essentially the world's currency. I mean, we they're traded around all over the place, and so that gives enormous advantage to not only to the dollar, but the American economy and the U.S. Treasury. Also, international oil transactions, the purchasing and selling of oil, essentially because of our allies. We'll come back to that. The Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, they basically refuse to conduct transactions for energy in anything but the dollar. So what all that means in practical terms is that the U.S. essentially runs the world economy, and we are. I mean, we have been for a while in relative terms the richest country in the world. We have it, and because of our military and the fact that we have 800 plus military bases around the world that we also use to entrench our economic power, ensure that the majority of the world's wealth is in one form or another under the control of the U.S. We essentially run the world economy such that we can punish individuals and states that we want to, and so that's how we do it. We freeze Iranian assets. We designate Iranian individuals or organizations, NGOs, as terrorist organizations. That allows us to freeze their assets if they have any, monitor what they're doing, and punish individuals. This is very important. Punish individuals that engage in transactions with them as well, if we want to. So because of just the United States' position in the world, that gives them a large degree of power and ability to wage a financial war again, or a trade and commercial war against Iran and other countries as well. So to answer your question, that's how the sanctions work. But it's also, there's a huge cost to that as well. I mean, it takes a lot of money. You kind of raised this on your question. It takes a lot of money to track the movement of Iranian goods or Cuban goods, or a Swedish flagged ship that's carrying Iranian crude oil or whatever. You have to make sure that doesn't dock in an American port, or move into the flow of commerce here in the U.S. It takes a lot of money and a lot of resources just to manage that. And of course, the consequences are devastating. It devastates the Iranian population, and in fact drives them to support the regime, because now their economy's in free fall. The only people who can guarantee their safety and security, since they're essentially cut off from the rest of the world, so to speak, is their own government. And we've actually seen this happen before. Saddam Hussein, who previously was an American ally, ironically, against Iran in the 1980s. I mean, Ronald Reagan took him off the list of so-called state sponsors of terror so that he could finance essentially and provide logistical and intelligence support to Saddam Hussein in the 1980s in the Iran-Iraq War. After the Gulf War, we flipped the script. And now Saddam Hussein is the new Hitler. We initiated a sanctions regime against them, and at one point it was determined that sanctions regime had killed or had led to the deaths directly or indirectly of about 500,000 Iraqi kids. And there's a pretty famous clip of this. Madeleine Albright, who was Clinton's Secretary of State, she was asked by a reporter if this was worth it. Is killing kids and women and civilians worth strangling this country to death? And she's like, yes, it's worth it. That had the effect of making Saddam Hussein more powerful. And when people in these countries see, wow, the United States is the reason I can't get a job or can't put food on my table, that turns people against us, that they don't like that. And that actually has the opposite effect. The intended effect is that people are going to live through this hardship and they'll be like, oh, fuck it, let's just overthrow this government so that we don't have to live with that anymore. But oftentimes it has the opposite effect. And people in turn, they say, it's called rallying around the flag. They say, well, okay, we don't like Saddam Hussein or we don't like whoever, but we're under attack from the outside and this attack is harming us. So of course we're going to resist in whatever way we can.
Let's get into that, because that's what is so confusing to me, because I'm going to butcher his name, but the supreme leader of Iran, he was supposedly evil, and that's why they're not supposedly, he was evil. He was running a tyranny over there, and that's the reason why the administration is saying that they went and killed them. But the people in Iran also hated this dude, but they didn't want their people to be bombed And then I was even watching some different diplomats on the Al Jazeera network, and there was these Iranian diplomats who were saying they asked them like, is now the political and governmental structure going to be all like out of whack in Iran now that the supreme leader is dead? And he was like, oh no, we're resilient people, we'll figure it out, we've done this before. But there's like also a whole lot of turmoil. Like there's no way you just like, oh, we're going to be fine, and the leader was just dead. But he was an evil leader. There's so many moving parts of like, what do the people of Iran need and want? And I can't trust the U.S. to tell us that, because we're moving off of our own interests. So what exactly is necessary in Iran? And like, yeah, what is the real issue here? Like, that's what I guess the question is. Who's the real enemy here?
So this this is a complex issue. We could spend a dozen episodes talking about this.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not going to hold myself out as an expert on internal
Right.
politics in Iran, but there's a couple points I want to touch on. One, yeah, it's true. The Iranian government, I mean, essentially every Iranian government since the 1950s, whether it's the government of the Islamic Revolution or the Shah, the Pahlavi dynasty that was overthrown in the Iranian Revolution of 1979, very repressive, very brutal regimes that have done a lot of torture, a lot of repression, made life miserable for a lot of Iranians. Certainly not a lot of love lost for the late leader Ayatollah Khamenei. But the reality is this. So there's a couple things. One is what we just said. I mean, despite this brutality and the repression of the regime, when Iran has come under foreign sanctions and foreign attack, that's had the opposite effect, and that's driven support of the regime. Two, I mean, there already is, and there has been since 1979, sort of a core base of support for the regime. So it's not like everybody hates the guy and is just itching to get him out. Like, no, they actually do have a solid base of support. And there's another important dimension to understand, though, is that among the sort of the activist base and the opposition, the folks that don't like the Islamic Revolutionary government, that don't like Khamenei and Khomeini before him, it may be that they oppose Iran and they want reforms and they want to see Iran change for the better. But wanting that is totally different than supporting an outside act of aggression by a foreign power. Namely the United States. And I think what you would tend to see, and what you have seen by a lot of activists, is that yes, they do want to mobilize against Iran. I mean, that they we saw in January, before these strikes, there's a massive protest movement that came under brutal repression by the regime. And I mean, there were some instances of, we won't know for years what was actually going on, but there's also been allegations that that the United States and Israel have also had assets on the ground that have kind of thrown oil on the fire. I remember there's a couple videos of people in masks like firebombing mosques and stuff, and there's videos of individuals shooting protesters. So I mean, but that aside, I mean, it's undeniable that the government has repressed those protests, and they have a long track record of a terrible human rights record. But again, wanting to combat that is very different than supporting outside aggression. I think that to the same extent, this apply to any country with a brutal dictatorship and a repressive government. I mean, yes, they want to mobilize against their government, but they don't want bombing the country to smithereens is not going to put them in a better position. Exactly. And I mean, and the thing is, the United States, it's nothing new. It's nothing new. In fact, we use the same rhetoric in Iraq. We use the same rhetoric just earlier in December with the attack on Venezuela, the previous attacks on Cuba, and
Russia used the same rhetoric in
everywhere. It's always
Ukraine.
Yes, we this is for you. We are bombing your schools and hospitals to help you. We are murdering your children because we care so much about your human rights. It's just totally empty rhetoric. It's total horseshit. But they have to sell the war somehow. They can't just admit, we're trying to punish Iran and we want to get rid of the regime and we want to either put in place the government that does what he says or just permanently break the country up. And they can't sell that to the American public. There has to be some rationale. And every imperial power in history, going back, however, this is what they do. Yes, they engage in brutal acts of aggression, and then for their own population, they sell it as, actually, we're doing something good. I mean, when Hitler invaded the Soviet Union and killed millions of people, he sold it as something good. When the British went around the world enslaving and colonized people, they sold it as, oh, this is the white man's burden. Same as the French. I mean, the Soviet Union, the same, when they were, crushing revolts and supporting brutal governments in, in Hungary and the Czech Republic. It was like, oh, we're helping you. I mean, every country that's engaged in aggression in history has some stupid a justification or pretext that kind of falls apart when you just look at it for 5 minutes. And the United States is no different. And unfortunately, they are trotting out the same arguments that they've always trotted out. Yeah, okay, we're trying to help them, and yeah, this guy is so brutal and their government's so bad. Well, okay, that's actually not a justification for war under international or domestic law. And even if it were, you're still going about it illegal. The American people never gave Congress the authority to declare this war.
The UN, go to the proper
with the UN, in any sense, it's illegal and it's fundamentally wrong and immoral. So I mean, and if we're talking about human rights, I mean, again, it takes about 5 minutes of looking at the history of the region to see that is just a bullshit. The United States has been financing and directly supporting a genocide by Israel for the last 2 years. The head of state of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, has an active warrant by the International Criminal Court for the crime of genocide. They've murdered. We still don't know what the body count is because they're still digging through the rubble. But estimates have. There's still and actually since this conflict with the war has broken out, Israel has reimposed a total siege on Gaza, and they've closed all the military checkpoints that they have in the occupied West Bank. So for all we know, the more people are going to starve and die in Gaza. So to have that and that again, that's just Gaza. We're not even scratching the surface of the last 50 years or so in the Middle East and all the awful things that the United States has done and the horrible things that we've supported and aided and abetted. If that is all going on in the background, how could you possibly claim to care about the human rights situation in Iran? It's just such transparent bullshit. I mean, you really have to not understand what's going on in the region at all to even begin to entertain that rationale. It's a joke to anybody. I mean, only in the West, only in Europe and in the United States, where we kind of live in this information bubble where stuff like this is just treated as fact. Like, oh yeah, it's a humanitarian intervention, and the United States just goes around the world promoting human rights and free markets and all this stuff. Only in those countries is that even taken seriously for purposes of ideology and propaganda. Nowhere else in the world do they take any of that shit seriously because it's just so far from the reality.
Right. I mean, it's sad because the reason why they keep using the same excuses because somehow it's working.
It is, and I mean, it's sad to say. I mean, just look at the reaction to what's going on. I mean, I think we can have another totally set of discussions about this, but I mean, look at the reaction in the American public to this blatantly illegal and wildly immoral war that they're waging. I mean, there's almost nothing. We're all just kind of sleepwalking through. I mean, there is some activism. I don't mean to undermine that, but I mean, in the mainstream and among the general population, I mean, and there's reasons for that. I mean, most the American people are exhausted. Most people are just busy trying to get by, and I mean, they don't have time to care about what's going overseas. I mean, this is so remote. But if you just
I think people assume that it's the U.S. military, so whatever they do, it must be for a good reason.
Exactly.
They believe that it's something outside of our normal brain or understanding and some deep military operation that we can't fathom. So if they needed to go and bomb Iran, this is the thing that I think of the regular person. If they went and go bombed Iran, it must have been for a good reason. Yeah, right. I think that's the normal thinking of a regular American citizen.
Exactly. It's kind of like the inverse of what I was talking about earlier with the whole rallying around the flag. When we sanction Iran and we bomb them, and that turns into support for their military, their regime. It's kind of the same concept here. It's like, oh, people they don't think too much about it for whatever reason, but they're like, oh well, I mean, if we're at war, there must be a good reason. God bless our troops. Let's defer to the government. They must be. There must be, and regardless of whether it is right or wrong, that's my friend. Those are my friends and my neighbors that are going to be dying, and so I'm gonna get behind them. And unfortunately, that's. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So what do you say to people who say this is nothing new? Trump is not the first U.S. president to bomb countries. We spoke about Iraq. Obama was dropping bombs places in different. Every president, I feel like I don't know if it's like a part of your presidency you got to bomb somewhere. what is the actual goal of these things? So first, what do you say to every president has bombed some country, and when we understand that how big of a superpower we are and how unnecessary it is for us to bomb anybody if nobody's a real threat. One, what is the reason why we're doing these bombings in the first place? No, so one, why is it okay, or why does it seem like it's being highlighted under Trump, even though all the presidents have done it? And two, why do all of these presidents do it? What is the goal of taking over Iran? I understand with Gaza, Israel has the vendetta they want on the land, but when we go into these different countries and these different regimes, I know they said it's to include democracy. We talked about the whole human rights thing, and it all seems like fallacy. Is it just complete world domination? That's what it feels like. Is that just what this is? Is it just greed and hunger and gluttony? I just want to control. We are the U.S. and we need to control and dominate everything. If you step out of line, you're getting clipped.
So there's multiple parts to each of those questions, and it's not, I can't really give one single answer. And again, I mean, a lot of, and what the answer that I'm going to give is also in part informed by my own political beliefs, but also I think it's also somewhat objective. A lot of this, it doesn't matter how you know what sort of political philosophy you have.
Right.
A lot of this is just objectively provable
Fact.
by examining history. So let me go reverse chronological order with your last question. Why are we doing this, if not for human rights or humanitarian reasons? And that, again, we could have a whole series of talks on this, but it basically comes down to this. And again, I'm sure a lot of people would disagree with me, but I think the history certainly supports this. The United States is an empire. We, you know, since World War II, no country in the history of organized human life has had as much power, as much wealth, as much security as we did. Europe was destroyed in World War II. The Soviet Union was destroyed. Germany was destroyed. Japan was destroyed. And there is this one giant, massive superpower that was, even before World War II, the richest country in the world, now has unprecedented power. I mean, in 1945, about more than half of the world's wealth was in some form or another under the control of the United States. Since then, we, like as I mentioned earlier, we've expanded our military presence such that we have military bases, 800 plus military bases around the world. We have half the world's nuclear arsenal. Nobody can. We spend more money on the military than the next 8 countries combined. Nobody has the power to project violence and force that we do. And in a matter of minutes, American bombs can be dropping on any surface of the world. We are just totally, no one can stop us. And, you know, we are sort of in school, in the media, by, you know, the sort of intelligentsia. We're sort of inculcated with this propaganda that the United States is unique in history and that, you know, unlike the British and the French and the Soviets and the Nazis and everybody else, we we're rich and powerful, but we actually go around the world helping people, and we're more about, you know, developing human rights and democracy and capitalism and free markets, and the good stuff. We don't exploit other people, you know. It just, I mean, we have all these military bases and it happens to look the exact same way as you know, the British Empire, the French Empire, etc. But that's just coincidence, you know. We are actually there to help people. Obviously,
the PR for the U.S. is pretty intact. we
exactly. And I mean, that's the reality. And I could go more, but I also want to get into why that is. I mean, the deeper issue here is that the United States is not a democracy. We're not even close to a democracy. In a democracy, it's not just about one person having one vote, but there's substantive democracy too. It means that whatever is public opinion becomes public policy. If a majority of the American people want national health care, for example, then if we had a substantive democracy, we would have national health care. If the majority of people wanted a tax on billionaires, we would have a tax on billionaires. Pick an issue.
Would have been gone.
Exactly. Pick a policy issue out of a hat. The majority of the American people feel one way and the government goes the other way. And that's because the American people do not control the American government. The American government is under the narrow control of powerful groups within the society. Namely multinational corporations, financial institutions, and wealthy and powerful individuals. They're the ones who are financing our elections. They're the ones who are staffing the executive branch and the State Department and the Pentagon. They're the ones whose buddies, who went to a fancy dancy law school and worked at some white shoe corporate law firm. They're the ones who are going onto the federal judiciary. We simply do not control decision making in the United States. The decision making is under the control of people who benefit from things like war in the Middle East. I mean, it may suck for you and me that we're attacking Iran, but guess who it doesn't suck for? It doesn't suck for Lockheed Martin. It doesn't suck for any of the other defense firms who are making the bombs.
Yes.
It doesn't suck for any of the big tech companies that are developing our intelligence gathering capabilities and whose systems are incorporated into our military technology. It doesn't suck for the private equity firms and the banks that are investing in all of this and have money on the table. Or the insurance companies underwriting all this. I mean, their interests, these people's interests, are diametrically opposed to ours, and they're the ones who can control our government. So that's why.
Yeah, you said it on the last pod. It's crazy. I was watching some of the clips from our last pod, and even the book you recommended, "War is a Racket," and you made the same point. Like, war is big money. Defense contractors, everybody's going to get contracts off of this war. They're going to make bread, and it's always the people who already are rich. No, it's true. It's crazy.
Unfortunately, that's the case. I mean, every now and then the American people can get organized enough, and they are disruptive and assertive enough to force what they want on our government. But if you look, I mean, every major accomplishment in American history, whether it's the ending of slavery, child labor laws, labor and employment laws, women's rights, desegregation, and the civil rights movement. I mean, the government didn't just legislate this stuff. It took decades of confrontation and riots and strikes and boycotts and just forcing and shutting down the economy and forcing private power and forcing the government to act in a way that we want. And I mean, take the Vietnam War. I mean, it's more complicated than this, but I mean, eventually opposition to the war got so great and so costly that the United States military couldn't sustain it. I mean, it also happened to be that, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole here, but I mean, after a certain point, American elites decided that, they didn't need to fight the Vietnam War anymore because the major strategic objectives had already been accomplished. Vietnam was destroyed, and they stopped the spread of independent nationalism to the rest of East Asia, which is the whole reason why we fought the war. But after a certain point, domestic opposition got so big that in the Pentagon Papers, it was mentioned that American generals were worried about sending more troops to Vietnam because they thought, no, we need these troops here in the U.S. for riot control, and because the protest movement had gotten so powerful that they weren't sure they were going to be able to stop it. Whether you deem the anti-war effort to Vietnam to be a success or not, one lasting effect that it had is that the United States couldn't just go around invading countries to the same extent that it did prior to the Vietnam War. I mean, we still projected power, and we still did awful things all over the ground, like supporting death squads and orchestrating coups d'etats and supporting awful dictatorships. But after Vietnam, there was an extensive period that lasted until about the 1990s or late 80s, where the political costs of sending troops and launching major ground invasions was too high. They just couldn't do it. It was called, actually, the term for this is called the Vietnam syndrome. And so, sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought here, but that's getting back to the topic of why we're doing this. I mean, that's really So I mean, at the end of the day, foreign policy, it's not controlled by folks like Akeem Earle and Adam Sadick. Okay, that the people with the real influence in how we develop foreign policy are the elites, the people with the money and powerful groups in our society. And you hear a lot in academic discussions and publications and in the news and in just generally information. So we hear a lot of talk about the national interest, like, oh, it's in the national interests to be in confrontation with Cuba or to have military bases in Europe, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that's, in my opinion, that's a fraud. There is no national interest there because there is no nation. America, France, Britain, whatever. These aren't monolithic things. Nations are made up of people, and they're made up of institutions. And those people and institutions have conflicting and competing interests. Like I said earlier, what's good for you and me is not what's good for Lockheed Martin and BlackRock. What's good for you and me is not what's good for Amazon and Tesla. Okay, very, very frequently they're diametrically opposed. But the problem is that Tesla and Goldman Sachs and all these, they're the ones who run the government. So domestic and foreign policy is made in a way that reflects and benefits their interests over ours. And if this is not just on war, this is about every policy issue you could possibly think of, from health, like you mentioned, healthcare, student loans, green energy development, all of this. It all comes back to the fact that we simply don't have a democracy here in the U.S. And very rarely, just very rarely, how what we want does win out. But it doesn't. It's not easy. It doesn't just happen. It takes lots of organizing, lots of resistance, and just constant confrontation. And like I said earlier, I think if you look back at American history, that's how everything's happened. Again, whether it's the fight for slavery, I mean, there's a lot of very tepid activity by the the federal government against slavery. I mean, they were Abraham Lincoln himself said that he didn't really care about slavery. He said, my goal is to preserve the Union, whether we do that by freeing every slave, freeing some but not all, or freeing none of the slaves. That's what I want to do. And the reason he said that was because he was called out by a northern journalist by the name of Horace Greeley, who was Congress had passed a law authorizing Union troops to liberate slave plantations after they had been reoccupied by the northern armies, and they simply weren't doing that. And so journalists, the Horace Greeley and other journalists and activists among the abolitionist base were like, "What the fuck, Lincoln? Why aren't you doing this?" And that's when he said, "Listen, my priority is," and the thing is, a funny thing too. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole, but this is just one example where it's like this just really proves that it's direct action that always gets the goods on any issue. Relying on our government to do the right thing is a recipe for disaster. They're never going to do it because they don't respond to us. They don't listen to us. Lincoln was really, hesitant to even wage the war in the first place. He was even though he was elected by sort of the radical insurgent wing of the Republican Party to be more confrontational with the South on the issue of slavery. He was very tepid when he first came into office. And people were pissed off. They're like, "What the hell? You're betraying your base." And what's ironic is, and if you read the book People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn, he discusses this to a large degree in one of his chapters. The decision to have a confrontational military posture with the states that would become the Confederacy only really kicked off when the new northern industrial billionaire class, that to use today's terms, they started to realize, oh shit, actually, yeah, they're really gonna secede, and we're gonna lose our investments. So we better fucking do something. Like Lincoln, hey, you better start mobilizing. You better start taking this seriously because we're about to lose our money. Then things changed. So, and again, it's not just with slavery. You could apply the same logic to the civil rights movement, and the struggle for labor rights, women's rights. It's always been, organizing. Again, it's the elites are the ones pulling the strings, so to speak. But the real momentum for change has always come from the grassroots and activists. The government has never taken it on its own initiative to address these issues in a constructive way. At least that's my take.
Yeah, that's right.
But sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, finish. I think you're about to go to what I'm about to go to. Yeah.
I was going to say, to answer your question about like why we should care, or what I would say to folks to say like, who think, this is just the way things work. Well, listen, like, we may think that the government, correctly, we may believe that the government just always does this and we're always going to be at war for whatever reason. But that doesn't change our responsibility. Okay, we are responsible. We are morally responsible for what our government does. If our government bombs Iran, that's us. That's our tax dollars, and that's eventually those are our lives. We're the ones providing the manpower and the resources to fight this war. We're responsible. If they blow up, if the U.S. Army if the U.S. Air Force blows up a school, that's us. Okay, so we have a duty to stop these illegal wars, whether we think they're inevitable or not. And it's just they're just wrong. They're wrong.
Yeah. What if anything makes this unique? The bombing in Iran, or the bombings that's happening in Iran, the killing of the leader. Is this unique from what happened in Iraq, or what we've done in Cuba, or any other state that we've infiltrated? What makes this unique, if anything?
So that's a very good question. Actually, I was kind of thinking about that earlier
Mm-hmm.
in our discussion.
Mm-hmm.
In a sense, it's not unique. I mean, we've been doing this. We've been
Mm-hmm.
waging illegal wars of aggression, undermining other countries' sovereignty outside the framework of the United Nations, international law, and even domestic law for very much of our history.
Yeah.
In that sense, it's nothing new at all. I mean, just go back even before World War II and the adoption of the United Nations system and the UN Charter. I mean, we acted very similarly. We're just constantly invading other countries and with the intent, the stated intent to control their resources or to project our power. In that sense, this is nothing new. It's just part of a
Mm-hmm.
broader pattern of illegality and state terrorism by the United States government. But in some ways, it is unique and not in very good ways. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
talking about the Iraq War, for example, that also was an illegal act of international terrorism, wildly illegal, not in self-defense, no authorization from the UN Security Council. But I guess to, in relative terms, I mean, at the very least, the Bush administration had a propaganda campaign to like get folks in support of the war. They actually bothered to whip up the population to support, the war. They went with all their bullshit rationales, like, oh, he's got nuclear weapons. Saddam Hussein was supporting Al Qaeda and Bin Laden. At least they went through the effort to do all that, and at least at the end of the day, Bush went to Congress, and Congress authorized the war, illegal and immoral though it was. So, I mean, what Trump and he really Trump is unique in that he does this on a lot of issues. Is he just kind of he doesn't care about the formalities, and he really says the quiet part out loud. I mean, he
Just
didn't even
bullying.
bother. He just went in and
Yep.
did it. He didn't even bother selling the war. I mean, if you're following developments in the region and you're following the facts on the ground, I mean, you could see through the justifications of the war immediately. But I mean, it's really shocking. I mean, he really didn't bother selling this at all. I mean, at least not on
Yeah.
the scale of previous
I
conflicts.
just saw Pete Hegseth. He's talking about the Iranians will look up and see bombs dropping from the sky, just talking crazy.
I
And
mean,
anybody, like you said, anybody who knows anything is like, why? It's like you sound like a bully. You just sound like, what is this for?
I
But
mean,
they don't care. They don't care.
exactly. They don't care. In fact, I mean, this is what they want. I mean, they want a
Yeah.
world. And when he talks about, oh, we're lifting all restraints on our use of force, the rules of engagement. We're not paying attention. That's Nazi language. This is This is no different than what you would hear from generals in the Nazi Party that were fighting Hitler's wars. I mean, this is exactly the same type of rhetoric, and it's extremely dangerous. And the effects are awful. I mean, what we're seeing in Iran is in a sense an extension of what Israel and of course the United States was doing in Gaza. I mean, they bombed 6 schools. They're bombing hospitals. They're bombing roads. They're bombing railroad stations, oil refineries. I mean, these are war crimes. They're war crimes that are being sort of implemented as basic policy. And what I mean, it's hard not to come to the conclusion that they're just doing this to see what they can get away with. And what's even more shocking to me, well, not more shocking, it's really not shocking at all. But what's particularly infuriating is the reaction to all of this in the United States, in the media, among the so-called opposition in the Democratic Party. I mean, nobody cares. I mean, look at if you can even call it opposition from the Democrats, it's really mostly centered around the procedural stuff. It's like, oh, you didn't come to Congress. They have no issue with him bombing hospitals and bombing schools, and the fact that this was wildly illegal under international law. It's just, oh, you didn't come to Congress first. And some of them, they're just like, oh, well, yeah, okay, so sure, this is bad, but like, we're in the war now. We have a duty to our troops and everybody to give Trump money and to make sure that we have the weapons and all this. It's like, if you and to go back to what Trump and Hegseth and all these people are saying about the war, it's like, why wouldn't they? If this is the opposition they have, and if the media is just slavishly going along with everything they say, the Democrats aren't putting up any fight, why wouldn't they? They're not facing any consequences from the Democrats. Like, they have every incentive to keep doing what they're doing. And yeah,
not to mention the fact that they're using AI in their military bases now, which is part of the reason why they're bombing hospitals and schools, is because they're using AI to pick targets. And I think I read something about like they want as many targets as possible, so they use an AI algorithm to decide the targets, and they just launch the bombs And obviously AI is not perfect, and they're gonna have mishaps. And it's insane. It's ridiculous.
It is, and actually, one anecdote on that point. I was reading an article, I forget where, but essentially, it was discussing this the integration of AI into our military systems, specifically our offensive military systems, not just our missile detection and air defense and stuff like that. I forget if it was an Israeli strike or an American strike, but recently in Tehran, the city of Tehran, I believe, there's a place that's called Police Park. And what it is, it's a park. It's a green area that was, that it was commemorating, the police and Tehran. I forget what specific police force or whatever, but that's beside the point.
Like the memorial that downtown DC, like that.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. And apparently, either an American or AI targeting system flagged this, because remember, they're not just targeting military targets; they're targeting Iran's civilian leadership, and they're targeting just the pillars of its government, in the hopes that the government is just going to collapse and there's going to be chaos, and the whole regime will be overthrown with something else. So that's part of why they are bombing hospitals and schools and civilian police, military police, and governmental buildings, et cetera, because they want a total collapse. Well, anyway, apparently either Israel or the United States bombed that police park, thinking that it was an actual police installation, and their AI detection system flagged it as like some sort of police barracks or some coordinating office for an Iranian police force. So they bombed it. And it's a fucking park. It's a park. This is a purely, I mean, they have no qualms about bombing a civilian target anyway, but it's like, this is a target that has no, there's just no rhyme or reason to it. There's no reason why you would otherwise bomb it. And I think that's a good illustration of your point.
Yeah.
And actually, to take that a little further, in Israel's genocide against, there's an Israeli publication called 972 magazine. They put out a lot of critical pieces on Israeli society, the Israeli military. A pretty rare publication in those terms. And they actually released a bombshell report. I think it was in 2024, looking at the sort of the AI systems that the Israeli military was integrating in their genocide in Gaza. And one of the systems was called, there were two main systems. One was called, I think in English it's the gospel. In Hebrew I think it was called Habsora. And then there's another system called Where's Daddy? I forget what the Hebrew name is, but Where's Daddy in particular was an AI tracking mechanism where they would basically, the Israeli military would use to track targets. And of course, their rationale is, these people are members of Hamas, they're whatever. It doesn't make them legitimate targets, by the way, but I don't want to go down the rabbit hole. But the long story short is they would use these mechanisms to track where Daddy, was it Where's Daddy or Daddy's Home? I think it was called Daddy's Home. But they would track targets, and they would track the targets outside the home, and then when they went back to their home, and once they were back in their home is when they would bomb the home to maximize casualties. They would kill the target and also their extended family. And this whole system was mapped out using artificial intelligence. So that's a whole nother dimension to this. I mean, and go back to the whole war is a racket. That's a big purpose of why we fight these wars in the first place. It's a testing ground. Israel has made a ton of money, and they've gotten a lot of investment since their genocide in Gaza, because they've basically been able to say, hey, look at this. Look at what this drone can do. Look at the family that we just vaporized. Look at how successful our drone systems and our missile systems are, and look at what we've been able to accomplish with these F-35s. Like, hey, you guys should invest in our air defense systems, etc. That's a big reason why we do this. It's a good marketing campaign.
And I'm thinking this might even be a response to this whole AI bubble about to pop, where it's like there's not enough use of AI. But if it's going to be used in the military, it's almost going to feel like a bailout. It's like, if this AI bubble is about to pop, we need a bunch of people buying this AI. Well, the government could buy the AI contracts because you can use drones and stuff like that. This is crazy.
No, that's a very good point. And actually, getting government procurement, not just with AI, but in technology generally. I mean, that's I don't want to go down the rabbit hole, but that's a huge
Yeah.
component of our politics and our economy in general. I mean, look at this iPhone. Every single piece of technology in this iPhone, from the touchscreen technology, Wi-Fi, GPS, every single piece of that technology is in some way or another can be tied back to the military and the Pentagon or the federal government in general. I mean, that's another reason why we spend so much money on war, is because war is this is what they refer to as the military industrial complex. War is the backbone of the high tech economy. What happens, and again, paraphrasing here because we just don't have time to go into all the details, but the Pentagon, the Navy, whoever, some arm of the federal government develop, and a big one is called DARPA, the Defense Asset. I forget the whole acronym, but they're sort of on the cutting edge of technology. They invest in technology early on when it's expensive and costly, and there's a lot of risk associated with it. And then once it's developed to a point where it has, more widespread military and civilian applications, then they essentially just give that technology over to private companies. And so take for instance aviation, right? The Boeing 747 is just a modified B-52 bomber. The United States government developed the technology that went into a B-52 bomber, the aeronautics, all the different component parts of the plane, and then it was just given over to civil aviation, to Boeing, and so the Boeing took that and made the 747. The Navy is the institution that came up with GPS. Again, that technology was basically, it was developed with private money, and it was just given to the private sector, and they incorporated it into their technology. Same as I mentioned with touch screen technology, etc. The internet itself came out of the federal government, and not just the federal government, the Swiss government, other governments as well. And that technology was just given away to the private sector, and then they use it to make some, phone that they sell at a 700% markup using slave labor in China or whatever. And it's just one giant mechanism for doing, essentially just doing research and development on behalf of private corporations.
We are cooked, man.
So you're touching on an important point. Listen, it's very hard to look at the reality and come away with purely positive feelings. But the thing is, if we do that, this is nothing new. I mean, everything that we're describing, everything that we just talked about, whether it's the military-industrial complex, the strikes on Iran, genocide in Gaza, none of this is new. We've all seen some variation of this in our lifetime and the generations before us. So while the scale of things may be worse to a certain extent, and the stakes are higher because of where we are in terms of climate change and nuclear proliferation and just war, etc. I think we're in a much more dangerous world than in previous generations. But we're not facing stuff that's necessarily new. People have organized and people have fought back against stuff like this for generations. It's always, things are bad. Yes, I'm not going to sugarcoat it, but the response should never be to just despair and give up. We are capable of doing amazing things. I mean, take the Vietnam War, for instance. I mean, people were really elites in the government and the private sector. They were genuinely worried that there would be a total revolution against our economic system, against our form of government, because people were simply just too educated and they were too empathetic, and they just had too much understanding of how government works and what we're doing overseas. They were genuinely terrified that there was going to be a revolution. Unfortunately for all of us, there wasn't. But that is within reach. Like, we have enormous power. And at the end of the day, ordinary folks outnumber them, so to speak. There's more of us than there are of them. Sure, there's a handful of people and organizations and entities that have outsized influence over our government, and that sort of they own the country and they run the show. But we are capable of winning victories, and I think history shows that. The history of the abolitionist movement, of the civil rights movement against the labor movement, women's rights movement, rights of women's for the rights of the child. We've won substantive victories. They may not be total victories, and they may be flawed, and there may be a lot of issues in each of those realms that we're still dealing with. But we have made progress. We can fight and we can win. It's just a matter of organization, and it's a matter of discipline and education and agitation. We can win. It's not easy, and I think it gets harder with every year that passes. But we can win. We can win. It's not all is not lost. All is not. It ain't over till the fat lady sings. And I think that it's just one thing that is harder about the current day is that we've lost a lot of sort of the organs of organizing that people have had in the past. Like now, the labor movement is essentially non-existent. I mean, back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, we reached at one point like 30% union density. So it was a lot easier to get working people together, and you had other civil society groups, and also just living conditions were easier. Part of the reason why the anti-war movement happened in Vietnam is because like we had this baby boomer generation that were pampered with really good lifestyles, and they got very good educations, and they had the time and the resources and the means to organize and be like, oh shit, yo, look at what's happening. We can't tolerate this. And people got out into the streets and they got politically active, and they said, fuck this, we're going to change this and we're going to fight back. That's all it takes. It's not. It doesn't take a magic pill or a magic wand or a silver bullet. It just takes sustained work and organizing, and we can change this and we can fight this. It's just it's difficult. It's a lot easier said than done. But I think as much as it is harder today than it was back in the day to organize, I think the intent is there. I mean, people are understanding what's going on in ways, and I think people, we're just on the cusp. Like this, we're like it's just beneath the surface. We just need that final push, and we need more organizing. And I think there's very good potential. People definitely don't give up. Don't give up hope. It's things, and I think I'm not a particularly big fan of Lenin, but he had one quote that's actually very relevant to this discussion. He said there are what he said, there are oh god, of course I can't remember the exact quote. I'm gonna butcher it, but the gist was like there are times where decades of progress happen on a whim, and on the flip side of that, there are decades where absolutely nothing happens. So all it takes is a spark. All it takes is a spark of organizing and mass demonstration and disruption, and things can change. Sometimes all it takes is a little push. And we have the means, we have the resources. It's just a matter of organizing. But that last part is the hardest. So don't.
You got me ready to run through a wall, man. No, that's
facts. I appreciate you, man. No, it's.
So I do want to end on what do you think this is going to end, or how far you think this is going to go with the U.S.-Israeli conflict in Iran? What is the ultimate goal? Do they want the complete obliteration of Iran? Do they want to install their own democracy? And kind of in that is like, I'm also thinking now is like you said, we've been a superpower for all these years. We've had this power. Why are we now taking people out? If we could have installed the U.S. could have installed who they wanted a long time ago. Are they allowing corrupt individuals to take over? But ultimately, when is this going to stop? I know you can't tell what's in this administration's mind, but like, do they have an end in mind? Is there some goal in mind, or do they just want the complete obliteration of Iran?
So I think this is going to be a multi-part answer. In terms of how the administration envisions this ending, I don't think they know or particularly care. I mean, I think Rubio and Trump himself were asked in a couple like press briefings, what is the off ramp here? And they didn't have an answer. They essentially there is none. What are, in fact, forget about an off ramp. What are the objectives of the war? Even that they have a hard time answering. I mean, we know that they do want to either overthrow the regime, totally destroy the nuclear program, or in the alternative, just split the country up and just have a sustained chaos and just make Iran a failed state. But I don't think they even know or particularly care. And why I say they don't particularly care, we have to go back in history here for a second. In one of our previous episodes, I mentioned something called the mafia doctrine, and this is the person that I heard use this was Professor Noam Chomsky. He said he's used this term in some of his lectures and writings and stuff. And basically, what that means is that the United States runs the world similarly to the way a mafia don would run Manhattan. You got everybody. You run the neighborhood with an iron fist, but also you got all the shopkeepers got to pay protection money. If a shopkeeper decides to stop paying that protection money, then you got to go in and you got to break his legs and you got to bust up his shop. And it's not so much, you don't do that because you need the protection money. You're the mafia don, you're the boss. You already got all the money, all the manpower already. The reason you do that is because if you don't go in there and you in the U.S. media, the analogous term for this would be establish credibility. If you don't go in there and bust up the shop and break kneecaps, well, then what happens is the shopkeeper next door, he's going to stop paying the protection money. And when he stops paying protection, then the next one, and the next one, and the next one. Next thing you know, you've lost control of the neighborhood. And so a lot of the reason why you see this hostility towards Iran, for whatever reason, comes back to this. And it's not just Iran, it's Cuba, it's North Korea, all of the countries that have just Nicaragua, Venezuela, countries that say essentially fuck you to the United States and powerful groups within our country and our military. They are, the designated bad guy. And for the same reasons that the mafia don needs to break the kneecaps of the shopkeeper that says no, the United States needs to be in a posture of permanent confrontation. That's why the Cuban Revolution happened in 1959, and we are still have them like under blockade. We are still essentially at war with them and sanctioning them. But it's fucking 1959. Just let it go. But again, it's the mafia doctrine. You have to function. Exactly. And we didn't really talk too much about like Iranian history here, but it's worth noting. I think we may have spoken about this in one of our earlier podcasts. But Iran was a democracy. It used to be at least have a republican form of government with credible, fair elections in the late 1940s and early 1950s. And the problem with that was that in 1951, a political party known as the National Front won the elections, and the National Front was led by a man named Muhammad Mossadegh, and he wasn't a radical. He was just an independent nationalist who believed in developing Iran using Iran's wealth and resources. And this was part of a pattern of many different countries all over the world after World War II, believing that this was in their interests. And a lot of them modeled these programs after the U.S. and the New Deal, just building up social democracy, making sure that government works in the interests of the ordinary person. But his mistake was that he had the funny idea of nationalizing Iranian oil, which was dominated by the British at that time, namely the Anglo-Iranian Oil Corporation, which later became British Petroleum, BP. They controlled the oil, and that had been going on since the early 1900s for a lot of reasons we can't really get into, but essentially they leveraged their power as an empire to get oil concessions so that they were the ones extracting the oil, and they were the ones taking it out of the country and selling it and profiting off of it. Mossadegh came into power and he said, fuck that, I'm going to nationalize the oil industry, and we're going to use the profits from that to build up the country, to have a social safety network, to provide healthcare and education, unemployment insurance, that every other country, at least developed countries had. Why should we not? Yeah. There's nothing illegal about that. Right. Other countries Britain at the time had nationalized damn near everything: the railroad industry, the water systems, the sewage systems, all of that. Mm-hmm. So they just want the same rights that everybody else did. But of course, at the time, Winston Churchill was in power. He ran to the CIA, and the Eisenhower government was like, "Guys, this is intolerable. Can you help us?" So the British and the CIA launched a coup d'état, and the Mossadegh government was overthrown. Their democracy was crushed, and the former Shah of Iran, Muhammad Rida Pahlavi, he was installed and he was just a brutal. Any pretense of democracy was crushed. He was an absolute monarch, brutal dictator, totally corrupt, jailed, murdered, tortured countless thousands, and just looted the country. Was a billionaire, and then finally in 1979, that's when the revolution happened, and this kind of fits a pattern elsewhere in the Middle East and in other countries as well. But the Iranian Revolution in 1979 started out as a pretty leftist, liberal, constitutionalist revolution, but they were just out organized by the super radical conservative so-called Islamists who went on to found what would become the Islamic Republic, that was led by the Ayatollahs and the structures that they put in place. So yeah, I mean, to get back to your point, yeah, we've been messing with Iran a long time, and they actually had a functioning democracy at one point, but we destroyed that democracy because we wanted control. We wanted control. And we wanted to help the British maintain, an imperialist system of extraction of their natural resources for their gain. So that's kind of some important background there.
All these years later, we come now and be like, "You guys are too corrupt." That's what we're coming, even though they had. Lord
yeah,
Jesus.
no, it's crazy. And I'm sorry, I kind of went down the rabbit hole there,
No,
but
you're good.
back to your original question. So where do we go? It's tough. Like, I mean, you said it yourself, like with war, predicting human behavior and war especially is damn near impossible. I think it's going to depend. The next few weeks are going to be critical. I think as things stand, Trump and the United States and Israel, they basically are seeing that Iran isn't as weak as they thought. The government, just even though they've decapitated the country's leadership, the government hasn't collapsed. The regime hasn't collapsed. In fact, they've been expecting this since last year when we attacked them the first time. And they've been preparing for hostility from the United States as early as, I mean, you probably argue go back to the 1979 revolution, but certainly since the first Bush administration, Bush II administration in the early 2000s, when Bush basically said, okay, Iran is an enemy of the state. They're part of this axis of evil, and basically they set the tone for an eventual military confrontation. That's when we really sanctioned their government. And basically set the stage for a long-term confrontation with Iran. So they've been waiting for this for a long time, and they've shown that even though we can decapitate their civilian leadership and their military leadership, and even though we can very much degrade their air defenses and their air force and their navy, they can still fight. And they can stay. Not only can they still fight, but they can still target American assets in the region. And in fact, what we've been hearing from folks in the Iranian government and sources, generally, is that Iran has basically they've been a little slow in their response to the Israeli-American attack. They focused their attack on American assets and Israeli assets, but they've been sort of, what their strategy appears to be is that they're just kind of flooding the system with low-grade missiles that are easy and cheap to reproduce. What they're trying to do is wear down the more advanced American missile detection and air defense systems, so that now what they're actually doing is now they're deploying the more advanced missiles, hypersonic missiles, and missiles that have the capability to inflict more damage and strike more sensitive targets. I mean, so why I mention that is, even now, before we're talking about a ground invasion, it's looking like this war is not happening the way that the United States and Israel intended it to go. But the next few weeks, whether there's a ground invasion or how the war just tends to go, and how what the fallout is on the global economy and the cost, not just to the United States but the other countries in the region, that's going to determine how far this war goes. If it does come to a ground invasion, I think we're looking at a much longer, more protracted conflict. Much more destructive one, unfortunately, for Iran and the other countries in the region, and for the American lives that are going to be lost as well. Certainly, if we do a ground invasion, it's going to be a very bloody, very costly one for both sides. I hope it does not come to that. But I think, to answer your question, it's the next couple of weeks are going to be pivotal. How the war goes now is going to determine it. Whether or not there's a ground invasion is going to determine it, and more. But separate and apart from that, Iran's ability to defend itself and strike targets, that's going to be a determinant factor. And also the economic costs to the rest of the world, and the political costs to the United States. That's going to be, I mean, if there is something more than just this tepid bullshit resistance to the war not just among the political class, but against the general population, that's going to give Trump more leverage. But if there's more resistance, more disruption, that's going to limit his ability to carry out the war. So that's going to be critical as well.
But gas prices are already up. Everything prices are already going up. It's crazy.
That's exactly right. Gas prices are going up. I think they've hit crude oil has gone above $90 a barrel. It's anticipated that as things continue at their current rate, it's easily going to hit $150 a barrel. Remember, Iran has now closed the Straits of Hormuz. So now they've blocked it off from shipping. So oil tankers and tankers carrying liquefied natural gas, they're not going through there. And also targets in Qatar and Kuwait and Saudi Arabia that produce crude oil and liquid natural gas and refine it, and they're just kind of hubs for the movement of energy. They've also been struck. I think right now Qatar, which produces, I think it's like 20 to 25% of the world's liquid natural gas, they've stopped totally as a result of this war. And I mean, we're looking at a disaster. The state of the world economy and the American economy is already pretty bad. But if this continues, I mean, it's just going to get infinitely worse. And that could also limit the extent of the war, how long it goes on, and both the United States and Israel's ability to just use force in general. So I'm not going to make any predictions. I don't think it's possible or helpful, but I will say, to viewers, pay attention to what's happening, because that's what's really, these next few weeks are going to be critical. So it really all just depends on what we see. I mean, I don't think, I will say this, it's not really a prediction, but I don't think that the United States can sustain a war at the rate that we're going. As things stand, I don't think we can sustain this for very long, both in terms of the material cost and the political cost. But certainly, if there's a ground invasion, I mean, I don't know. We seem to always have money for war, and we always seem to have manpower for. So, I mean, how that ends up happening, what that looks like, I can't say. But I realistically, I don't think that the administration is going to be able to prosecute a war of that scale for very long. At least I hope not.
Right.
And I think that if it does get to a ground invasion with lots of with 100,000 troops on the ground, I think the resistance and the popular organization against the war is going to go up dramatically. Now, I mean, we've lost a couple. I think it was like in that one strike on Kuwait, 6 service members were killed. And again, we also don't know the true extent, because a lot of this is like for reasons of propaganda. They're not gonna tell us what the true costs are. It's kind of, there's conjecture by a lot of analysts and people following the war closely that the costs have actually been a lot higher than what they're willing to admit. And the reason they're not admitting that is obviously for political reasons. They want to be able to continue this war, and the more the public sees of the cost, the more destruction, the more lives lost, particularly American lives, the more resistance to the war among the general public is going to build. So it's again, I think their ability to in practice to carry out the war is very limited, but it all really depends on how things shape up, and ultimately the level of resistance that they get from the American public.
Lord help us all.
Amen.
That has been Adam Bob back again with some, I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you retain so much information. I learn so much every time we talk. I know the audience learned a lot too. Do y'all research, man. Please stay connected. Go on YouTube, go on Google, understand what's going on. Because I agree. Like, I don't see an end in the near future for this, and we don't know how much other impact this is going to have. So don't think this is like not too close to home for you to worry about. And like we said in the beginning, it's like people still got to buy their groceries this week. People still got to take their kids to daycare. It feels like, bro, I got to take my mom to a checkup appointment this week. All these different type of things that people have going on in their lives. It feels like I can't worry about Iran. But like you said, it's a trickle-down effect of all these things that's going on in our democracy and international relations. Is going to hit your doorstep at some point. So be aware and be informed, and come to the whole lawyer and the Adam Bomb for some of that information.
That's right. That's what I think. I appreciate you, Akeem. That's right. Like, follow, subscribe, do all that. Yeah. Thank you for having me, man. I appreciate the kind words. I love coming on here and talk about all this stuff. This is as fun for me as it is as I hope it is educational for your viewers. So I appreciate you. Thank you for the kind words. Thank you for having it all, man. I appreciate that.
Yeah, you'll be back. We'll be back for another episode.
Yes, sir.
The whole lawyer.